in September, of which one of the recommendations was to create a community connectivity index. And since that time, Nate, myself, Karen Perry, who's one of my colleagues, and Karen Hansen, another one of my colleagues here at NTIA, have been engaged in a good bit of informal stakeholder outreach, and in addition done quite a bit of digging around on other large-scale change programs, and they have been able to influence community action to actually to motivate communities to take action. So for this initiative, our goal is to improve community broadband policies and to really help you drive access, adoption, and use in the way that it supports your own community goals, whether they are economic development, jobs, better education opportunities, improving the delivery of health care. And the way that we're thinking of doing that at this point is to develop some clear indicators and or benchmarks that are common and can be used by communities individually to facilitate your conversation internally, and also to give you some tools and resources to mobilize your other community leaders, whether it be from the libraries, from the schools, from the hospitals or health clinics, your own internal IT department, to really look at how you can improve broadband for your own use as well as to citizens and businesses in your communities. What we've heard as a part of our informal stakeholder outreach is that it's really important that there be some assistance provided to communities as a part both of taking the index or engaging in the process for evaluating your local state of broadband, and that it really be more of a supporting mechanism for communities on an ongoing basis. And then the fourth is really about creating what you guys have started creating over the past year with Next Century Cities in developing a community of practice amongst yourselves to learn from there and build on actions that you have taken individually in a more collective way that helps you reduce your costs, reduce the number of missteps along the way, because we know this can be a very complicated process. So as a matter of what the program is, what we've done is tried to align that really closely with what you would do as a community, even without this program or process, to move your community along kind of the continuum of first assessing where you are in terms of what assets do you have, identifying your gaps, and we hope and expect that the self-assessment that is developed will be a tool to let you do that in a way that is as efficient as a process this complex can be. And that should well align with the initial steps you would take in developing a broadband plan yourself anyway. The objective of the outputs of your taking that self-assessment is that you get a generated report that includes both a recommendation on actions that you can take, as well as an index ranking. And what we've learned from talking to stakeholders is that there's a lot of interest in that being driven by peer groups, and what we've heard to date is really that would be, again, similar communities in terms of population and population density, and that what we've also heard from some of the stakeholders that we've talked to locally is that you'd really want something that is the kind of report that you can take to other sectors in your community. Again, back to if the people that are engaged from the get-go are, let's say, the IT department and the schools, that you have something you can take to speak to the health clinics and others who would be interested but haven't started to look at this as a strategic component for delivering delivering the services that they do in their sector. Then once you get to the point of planning, real planning, putting a plan on paper and implementation, both NTIA and Deb and her colleagues at Next Century Cities have access to resources that can help you take kind of the big recommendations, put them in the context and with the filter of what are some of your constraints, either from state policies, state laws, local restrictions, or if you are the city and have some restrictions because the county controls your right-of-way, whatever those might be. You know, we think that there's a place for one-to-one assistance that really takes into account some of the other restrictions that you might have or limitations that are outside of your control that are really important on a one-to-one basis. And that's where, you know, the idea is that you'd be in a position to start taking action once you've got a really clear picture of that. And then as a matter of the fourth step, and one that we think that Next Century Cities can best help with, is building this national community of practice and you know, doing a good job of storing some of the resources that have developed as a matter of coming together on broadband plans and the implementations and the hurdles that folks have hit along the way. And that's where it's, to some extent, right through Next Century Cities and other communities who pick this up and start to hear about who's already in the game. There's that peer learning, evaluation, reflection on the steps that you've taken to date. And I'll pause here to see if there's any comments or questions at this point in the slide deck. And seeing none, I'll go ahead, but again, free to post any questions or comments in the chat room as they come up. So on the national benchmarks, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the buckets of indicators. I think that the access and the adoption components as buckets are pretty straightforward. We also think that there's room for one related to policy and what you're doing locally, and then related to, especially if your objective, right, is about driving economic development, driving jobs, then how is broadband an enabler to those objectives? And we think that's a really important one, but also one that the actual metrics are going to be a little bit harder to develop, both what they are as well as measuring them. And but it's something that we think is really important because it is what ties together, like, why you're doing broadband is not for broadband's sake, but for purposes of furthering other community objectives. So that's one that we think is going to be fairly difficult to take on, but think it's also really important. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback noise, and I just check in to see if everybody has us on mute, or it sounds like maybe that's been taken care of. Thank you. So as a matter of that second step, once you've looked at the indicators, we expect that the tool would give you a report readout that includes a number of recommendations based on where you are with regard to national data points, with regard to survey data that gets collected, evaluating your own policies, and then engaging individual sectors in how they're using it. And that would, in the ideal world, give you some, based on where you want to go, give you some feedback in terms of recommendations for next steps to take. And we're also looking at how that can be a pre-qualification, or at least guide you to the right federal grant programs based on criteria for applying for any number of grants, whether that's at VA or HUD or HHS, some of the different programs that through the Broadband Opportunities Council have begun to make broadband more integral to their grant programs and making sure that funding is available through those programs as well. We also think the index component of it is important, but as I mentioned, we've heard from initial stakeholder feedback that being more robust than just a list of cities, 1 to whether 18 or 30,000 with a ranking number, but that it is more robust than that and actually looks at those national norms, takes into account population density, and frankly uses some methodology that's probably much more robust than we could come up with here at NTIA on our own, and are looking at researchers and academics who can inform that component of the index in a more robust way so that you're looking at your peers. Once we get to step 3 in the process, to planning and implementation, because again, the objective here is to drive action and taking steps towards actually changing the status of broadband in your community. And as I mentioned, we have a group of colleagues here at NTIA who provide technical assistance to communities who are looking to change their broadband future, and I know that that's a big part of what Deb and her team at Next Country Cities does as well, and we think that's definitely a growing set of resources and an ecosystem that we hope can build into that community of practice nationally. So it's really that community of practice that I think is really going to help drive change, right? Starting with forums like this, more of the formal forums that Next Century Cities has, that NTIA co-sponsors with them, to bring together communities who are interested in this work and start to take action and learn from each other. How can we start to document that in a way that you don't just have access to what's been done, but there's some evaluation of that work, that you know there's a resource that you can go to understand who trusted other resources are, that you're not kind of to figure all of that on your own. We also think that it's important that the information be data, not date-driven. Apologies for that typo. And that data is developed in a fashion that is very locally driven. So that's why, as a matter of developing the indicators, we really think it's going to be important to engage stakeholders more directly in terms of what those are and how we measure them. And as to the benefits for any individual community to participate, we think that by establishing what those benchmarks are nationally, that it gives you both a tool to assess where you are, as well as to establish where you are against your peers in the group, and that's something you can use not just for your own purposes, but across your community stakeholders to bring more people into the process to understand what role they can play, what resources are available to them, and start to grow that community of practice there for you locally as well. As a matter of the time frame in terms of rolling out the index, I think this is going to be a pretty robust process. As I mentioned earlier, we do want to engage starting at the beginning of the year in a more formal stakeholder and partner engagement process. And that's well underway as we speak in terms of defining where that will happen and the process for doing that, and I'm sure we'll be back in touch with Deb to roll that out in the coming month or so. We're also looking to really shore up the partners, both in the community sector, the not-for-profits, and the philanthropic community, this as a priority for the work that they're doing. And then starting probably in the middle of the second, begin to pilot the indicators that are defined as part of the stakeholder engagement process. And that's probably going to need to be a paper process with in the range of half a dozen, no more than 10 communities to really take an initial step in that direction. And I'll pause here for just a second, sharing the scores. At this point, the feedback that we've gotten is that there wouldn't be, the scores wouldn't, individual scores wouldn't be shared publicly, but that aggregate data could be shared, number one. Number two is we've also heard an interest from communities who are making progress, who are driving change, that there is an interest in recognition. Again, we think what's really important is action and change and progress, not necessarily some federally defined end game, but it's the progress piece of it. So we're looking at how do you recognize and report something that we want to look at. So hopefully that answers your question, Deb. I'm seeing another question about, excuse me, how would the pilot? Oh, selecting the pilots. So ideally by the end of January, we'd have, you know, even 100 communities interested. Purposes of 10 for the initial paper pilot, that what we'd like to do is be sure that we get a mix, both in terms of, you know, population, rurality, that are already cities and are further ahead, but make sure we also incorporate those who are just getting started. So on trying to be sure the communities and with us for developing their planning. You'll notice, and I'll go ahead and jump down, there's a beta pilot in the fourth quarter of 16, and we hope that all 50 or even 100 who kind of agree in the January, February timeframe that they want to participate will be in a position to do the beta pilot test once that moves online. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to read. So that was just a comment of the work that's being done in the Roanoke Valley Broadband Authority, and confirming that in his view that recognizing progress and change is a really important component. So thank you for that. Let me make sure I don't miss anything on this time frame. We talked about the alpha pilots and how those would get selected, and the beta pilot that comes later in the year, but it's really in the third quarter of 16, the calendar year 16, that the hard work I think is going to have to get done to develop an online tool so that we have something that can scale, and that it's informed by people who do surveys and research and have a lot more knowledge than I individually do on this kind of stuff. So I think the really hard work is going to come in the third quarter of 16. And then we'll be back out to hopefully all of you on this call to engage in the beta pilot to take this for a drive online. And I think experience tells all of us that when you're creating an online tool, you probably need to expect that there'll need to be some tweaks and refinements and improvements to launch it more broadly and have it ready to actually scale to the number of communities that there are in this country. And then, you know, in the time frame of this time next year, we'd be looking at prepping to actually launch it nationally and making it open and available to any community who wants to opt into the process. So that's really our timeline for rolling this out, and aggressive, but there's been a lot of interest. We've been very, very pleasantly surprised to talk to communities. In fact, I'll mention, I see that Bruce Clark is on the call from Charlotte. I was there not last week, but the week before to meet with him and his Digital Charlotte planning team, doing a lot of work there, so thank you. And give me just a second. So we do think that this is a pretty large community that needs to come together in order to make this happen, that it's not just the government, it's not just communities, and it's not just the not-for-profit and philanthropic communities, but that we can do that much more working together towards a common goal. And what we're working through now, and I think would welcome some additional input on, is the individual roles of the folks in this diagram. It's not actually on here and explicit at this point, but I think we want to be sure that we include and understand what their role is the commercial partnerships, you know, whether that's service providers or other for-profit entities that can provide some insights, expertise, and resources along the way as well. So what is our commitment from NTIA and the Broadband USA team? And that starts with work and resources dedicated to doing this outreach work, to hear from communities about what matters to them, to be sure that what gets formed and shaped is a grassroots effort and informed by the work that's being done in communities who are well ahead of the game in terms of digital inclusion initiatives, in terms of community broadband initiatives, in terms of like. We will be conducting the pilots and doing the self-assessment support as those number of communities come in to participate along the way. We will be a partner to the research to develop the scoring methodology, but again, think that that's probably either an academic institution or research institution, somebody whose core function includes developing survey instruments and the like to do that. We are committed to developing this online assessment tool. I think, you know, dependent on how much interest, hope to make this a really robust and useful tool that will to as many of the communities that want to participate. And we'll be doing a project, and as things evolve and identifying points to reflect and view on the phone, is in the early part of 16 to collaborate on developing the self-assessment tool. What are the indicators? What work have you done already? What kinds of surveys have you sent out? You know, we want to use that body of work to inform what we're doing and build on your successes and work to date. Then, of course, in the second half of 16, as the tool is developed and ready for piloting, I think it's going to be really important that we have a pretty large test drive that beta test and get us some really solid feedback on how the tool works, how useful it is, and test how well the report that gets generated as a part of that is to your process along the way. I'd like to pause there since that piece is really direct to define the way we want to engage with those of you on the phone and see if there's any questions or comments. Okay, we'll keep moving on then. We've also engaged pretty heavily with the not-for-profit organizations, Next Century Cities being one. We've talked to in fact, just earlier today, the Conference of Mayors. My colleague Karen Hansen has been out and met with the National League of Cities and their IT committee. And we've also been engaged with the acronym is ICMA. It's the City Managers and County Managers Association. I'm at a loss for what the acronym explicitly stands for, but that group has been well engaged, and as member communities of those different organizations interests, we've been a conduit to sharing this information with them and expect to continue to do that. I think I got this backwards. I mentioned to you that we have talked to a number of philanthropic partners. That includes the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and specifically their work in Charlotte and their non-resident community. More recently with the Deutsch Foundation, who is supporting a lot of this type of work in Baltimore, and hope to be expanding that engagement along the way. There's been quite a bit of interest from those folks, both in terms of sponsoring communities where they are, intimately engaged, as well as in the research and development component of that. That's stuff that some of them have traditionally looked at, and certainly where there's mission alignment with their community and objectives or their broader national policy objectives. As a matter of next steps, I think I mentioned in the timeline that we're looking for a January or February announcement of what this is, and hope to announce along with a number of partners that are community partners, philanthropic partners, and not-for-profit partners, and then build off of that in the range of 4 public meetings and other mechanisms to capture input on the indicators to ensure that that really is a grassroots defined tool and process, and then engage the right resources to really start to develop that tool that we think is going to be the heavy lift mid-next year. And then in the second quarter of next year, on the initial alpha pilot that will test the indicators that are developed as a part of the stakeholder outreach process. So that's what we're doing here, and hope to engage with each of you individually as well as collectively in more depth along the way. I'll check back with Nate. I think you're still on the line. If there's something you want to add about the.
No, that was a great overview. We're very excited about the effort and think it's really critical to get these, pilot efforts up and running this spring and summer to really test run this and more importantly start bringing resources to you all to help advance broadband projects. From the president's perspective, we have just over a year left, and we want to make sure that we use every moment as. So we're really excited to be pushing forward quickly on this.
Thanks, Nate. So that's really what we wanted to share. I know a webinar makes it a little bit difficult to have an engaging discussion. As I mentioned, we do plan to have a process that includes more formal input, and we're also reaching out individually. I think I assume Deb has shared our contact information as part of setting up this webinar. If not, I'll make sure that that gets shared. If you have offline comments, suggestions, if there's a body of work that you've undertaken that we should be informed by, or if you're ready to sign up as a community partner on this, then certainly want to be sure that we make it easy for you to be in touch.
There are several questions now in the chat box if you have a few minutes and want to go back to them.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I missed those. Since cities have, so I'm reading a question that says, since cities have obviously relied heavily on consultants in developing their own projects, where do you see them fitting in? So that's a great question, and I do think that this is certainly not in lieu of consultants, but we do think that there's room for, frankly, getting you better prepared an organization such that should you go to a consultant that you'd have established your baseline and then be better prepared to talk about what you want those consultants to do before you start, paying for that work. Let's see, second question. Hello, how will you be requesting this information? I'm guessing that came in as I was talking about collecting information and input on the indicators, and that is in process. The expectation right now is that we'd host approximately 4 regional meetings in the first quarter of 2016, and we're investigating the option of a public comment process that would allow anybody, really, from individual citizens to organizations of any and all size, and a background to provide official comment to the process. Oh, and thank you, Bruce, for clarifying the ICMA acronym, International City County Management Association. Question. Collaboration from communities makes progress will help develop a better tool for NTIA. This will help many other communities trailing in their efforts. How do you see it helping communities now struggling to implement solutions as they contribute in this process? And be sure I understand the questions. How do you see it now? So if I'm reading the question correctly, it's getting at, for communities who have engaged in a process and are making efforts around community engaged planning, that what resources can be provided in terms of supporting implementation.
Can you how does being part of this pilot impact the change outcomes? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's probably the question that was being asked. So I think that that will develop to some extent, but our goal is, frankly, if it's a matter of getting a roadblock because of access to capital, which we hear quite a bit of, that help direct an amendment to federal resources, whether it's finance or other funds that can be made available to a community implementing their project. Also, that the community, sorry, go ahead.
This is Karen. I'd also say the year 2016 communities are the shapers, and I think that long benefit. We are in it. It's a long game, I think. And I talked to somebody today that broad mission, and but over time, when we get into 2000, we hope that communities align internal resources, build their own case, and that it will make existing resources more readily available right away, and then over time attract more resources, both in terms of funding resources, but also in terms of processes. I think everybody who's doing this knows that it is a journey. It takes some time, and anything we can do to streamline that process, we believe, will help. So near term, the most immediate value, I think, is that shaping in 2016 and kind of, but in 2017 and beyond, it's alignment, streamlining the process, and we hope it will attract, make it easier for you to attract existing resource, but it will actually grow the resource pool over time.
Great, thank you, Karen. I'm going to come back to the question to Nate. Thank you, Kansas City and Rick, and thank you, Mesa and Alex. And Deb asks, do you anticipate additional federal funds coming available? So that one's a tough one for me to answer. As a matter of you know, the traditional work that I've done here at NTIA through the BTOP program, you know, we're not counting on there being another big investment of structure and public computing and training to come along. We think it'll be much more incremental. I think that the work of the Broadband Opportunities Council to an eligible expense in that they serve is a much smaller pool, but can be very impactful and more tied to use. In the conversation that we had with Jane at the Deutsche Foundation earlier this week, it was interesting to hear about, from her perspective, how much progress they're starting to make just by having cross-sector communication about broadband as an enabler in each of those sectors. So no short-term cash coming, but certainly something that's worth, I think, planning for. Let's see. Interested can we connect this to smart cities on an open forum would be keeping with these efforts? I think that's a good point, and probably something that we should look at more formally to engage with the Smart Cities initiative. So thank you for that input and comment. And so that was it. I'm going to go back up. Nate, there was a question directed about your comments with regard to duration, and a question related to what else besides the things that you'd be looking and listening for from this administration in its last year.
Sure. Yeah, I unfortunately on the White House computers can't get access to the webinar. You know, first, just on the smart cities piece, I think that's a great idea, and my colleagues and I have been talking about you know, that very point that the sort of expanding broadband access goes hand in hand with you know, building smarter cities and smart city technology. In terms of other things that you should be on the broadband front, I mean, I think we're going to continue home initiative, and so all the kids part of that pledge. And similarly with ConnectEd, we're you know, going to continue pushing to bring higher speed broadband and devices to schools around the country. So those are two really big areas. You know, for the administration more broadly, that's a sort of a big question. You know, I think you see the president continue to push really hard on climate change. Obviously, we're very, very excited about the negotiation in Paris. Obviously, economic opportunity continues. I think in both of those areas, you'll see a lot from the president over the next year.
Great, thank you. So let me scroll down and be sure I didn't miss any questions. Vicki, will you be proud to become a part of the alpha beta pilot? If so, yes, we will be happy to send that out. And we're going to be working with Deb, so engage with any of you directly who are specifically interested. We will be working very closely with Deb and NCC going forward. So never fear that there will be any lack of information flow to you and your colleagues on this. Thank you. I think I covered them. Deb, did I miss anything?
Nope, I think you did great. And just so everyone knows, we will be sending out updates regularly through our Thursday email blast. So watch that for any information about the pilots and any further opportunities. We'll also send out to you a copy of this slide deck as well as a link to the webinar itself. So you'll be able to share that with others in your community. So I appreciate that you've all taken all this time, and thank you, Nate and Laura and Karen, for sharing this project with us for our feedback. I hope it was really helpful to have those questions and to hear about the interest and commitment on the part of our members. So thank you all for participating, and don't hesitate to send additional questions or suggestions or any other thoughts you may have about this, and we'll be certain to make a great connection with the folks at NTIA with all of that information. So I thank you all, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks so much.